You have a fever, not a mild one, a real one. The kind where your vision blurs and your body shakes and every bone feels like it's been filled with wet cement. Now imagine it's 50,000 BC, no pharmacy down the street, no doctor you can call, no white pill you can swallow with a glass of water, no way to even explain what is happening inside your body. Just you, the fire, the dark, and whatever is growing in the ground outside. And here's what nobody tells you about that moment. You survived it, not you specifically, but your ancestor, single one of them. Generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years, before antibiotics existed, before hospitals existed, before anyone understood what a germ even was, they survived infections that should have killed them. They survived fevers, wounds, parasites, and diseases. They watched each other get sick, and they figured out what helped and what didn't. And the answers they found are still inside the medicines keeping people alive today. This is not a story about primitive people guessing in the dark. This is the story of the oldest and most successful medical experiment in human history. And it started before anyone thought to write it down. Before we go back in time, let's establish one thing clearly. The assumption most people carry is that ancient humans had nothing. No knowledge, no system. No real medicine, just prayers and luck and waiting to see who survived. That assumption is completely wrong. According to research published in the Annals of Botanica in 2024, the knowledge of healing properties of plants was accumulated over millennia by traditional healers through trial and error and was passed down from generation to generation. Evidence in the form of written documents, monuments, and even original medicines indicates that plant-based healing represents the oldest and most widespread form of medicine in human history, the oldest and the most widespread. That means every civilization that ever existed on every continent independently arrived at the same conclusion, that the ground beneath their feet was full of substances that could change what happened inside a human body. They didn't have the word pharmacology. They didn't have microscopes or laboratories. What they had was time, thousands of years of watching, of testing, of dying from mistakes and surviving from discoveries and passing both forward to the next generation. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Between 40 and 80% of pharmaceutical products used in modern medicine today are derived from plants. The drugs keeping people alive in hospitals right now, the ones treating cancer and malaria and heart failure and severe pain, many of them trace their origins back to plants that ancient humans were already using thousands of years ago. That is not a coincidence. That is a 50,000-year head start. The first question is the obvious one. How did ancient humans even know which plants worked? There were two ways, and both of them are more fascinating than you might expect. The first was direct experience, brutal, unforgiving, and slow. A person eats something. Something happens. Their body changes in a way they can observe. Maybe the pain gets better. Maybe the swelling goes down. Maybe they get violently sick and nearly die. Either way, the information gets filed away. Not in a book, in a memory, in a story told around a fire, in a warning passed from parent to child. This is called trial and error, and it sounds simple. But run it across thousands of people over thousands of years, and it becomes something extraordinary. It becomes a living database of what works and what kills you, tested on real human bodies, refined by actual outcomes, preserved in the most reliable storage system that existed before writing. Human memory, maintained by human culture, passed through human generations. But there was a second method, and this one almost nobody talks about. They watched animals. The ancient Indian text called the Rig Veda, written around 2000 BC, specifically states that humans acquired knowledge about the difference between healing and poisonous plants by observing animals. Humans, it says, watched what animals ate when they were sick and learned from it. This is not superstition. This is science. Today, researchers have confirmed that primates, including chimpanzees, gorillas, and monkeys, use specific plants to treat disease. They use them as anti-inflammatories, antimicrobials, pain relievers, and digestive aids. There is one example in the research that is genuinely difficult to forget. A plant called Vernonia amygdalina is used by chimpanzees in the wild to treat parasitic infections. The exact same plant is used by the human inhabitants of Tanzania to treat fever. Two species, no communication between them. The same plant. For the same purpose, the chimps figured it out. The humans noticed the chimps. And somewhere in that observation, a piece of medical knowledge was born that survives to this day. In 2024, something even more remarkable was documented. A wild Sumatran orangutan was observed treating an open wound on its own face using a poultice made from a plant with known biologically active properties. It crushed the plant with its fingers and applied the material directly to the wound. Repeatedly, over several days, scientists called it the first documented case of a wild animal treating a wound with a medicinal plant. Researchers believe it provides direct insight into the origins of human wound care. The medicine cabinet was always there. Humanity had help finding it. At some point, the knowledge stopped being purely spoken. It started being written down. And what was written down tells a story that is almost impossible to believe from where we stand today. In Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, clay tablets were discovered dating back to 500 BC. These tablets describe 12 medicines prepared from over 250 plants, including myrrh, opium, cumin, and mandrake. This is some of the oldest written testimony of plant-based medicine that exist anywhere on Earth. But then things start happening fast across multiple civilizations simultaneously. In China, around 2700 BC, the Emperor Shennong produced a text cataloging 365 medicinal plants and their uses. Among them were ginseng, cinnamon, ephedra, and camphor. This text is considered one of the oldest written guidelines on the treatment of disease using plants. Many of the substances he described are still in clinical use today. In India, the system of Ayurvedic medicine, which literally means knowledge of life in Sanskrit, was being developed around 6000 BC. The sacred texts called the Vedas contained the earliest references to medicinal plant use in Asia. A later Ayurvedic text called the Sushruta Samhita, dating to the 4th and 6th centuries BC, described the medicinal values of approximately 700 plant species. 700. All documented, all categorized, all with specific uses, dosages, and applications described in detail. And then there is Egypt. Around 550 BC, an Egyptian physician or scholar produced a document that would become one of the most important medical texts in human history. It is called the Ebers Papyrus. It describes over 850 plants used for medicinal purposes by the Egyptians. 850 plants. Individually documented, with specific uses described for each. The Egyptians used garlic to treat circulatory disorders. They used mandrake to relieve pain. They used willow to reduce inflammation. They used cannabis, aloe, pomegranate, castor, and preparations of wine and beer for specific medical conditions. And here is the detail that reveals just how sophisticated this system had become. The Ebers Papyrus does not just list plants. It describes specific dosages for each individual drug. Researchers believe ancient Egyptians were the first civilization to develop the concept of posology, the science of correct dosage, the understanding that the same substance in the wrong amount could heal or kill. They didn't know about molecules, but they knew about quantity, and they wrote it down. Now here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because it turns out that a significant portion of what ancient humans figured out was not superstition. It was not coincidence. It was not guesswork that happened to work. It was real medicine. We just didn't know why it worked until recently. Take willow bark. The first written evidence of willow bark being used for pain and inflammation dates back over 3,500 years, used by both the Sumerians and the Egyptians. Hippocrates, around 460 to 337 BC, prescribed willow bark to treat inflammatory pain. Dioscorides, the Roman military physician whose medical text was used across Europe for over 1,000 years, described willow bark preparations for treating gout, colic, and earache. Populations from different parts of the world who had no contact with each other, including indigenous groups in South Africa and among various Native American peoples, all independently arrived at willow extract as a treatment for fever and pain. The reason: willow bark contains salicin. When processed by the human body, salicin converts to salicylic acid. In 1897, a chemist working for Bayer synthesized a stable version of this compound. They called it aspirin, the most widely used drug in the world today. Derived from a plant that healers across multiple ancient civilizations had been recommending for 3,500 years before modern science understood the mechanism. They were right. They just did not know exactly why. Now take the opium poppy. According to the research, the opium poppy appears to have been cultivated as early as 6000 BC. In ancient cuneiform tablets, it was referred to as the plant of happiness. The Ebers Papyrus mentions opium around 1500 BC. Arab physicians between 1100 and 800 BC created opium-containing preparations to treat mental problems, epilepsy, and pain. Hippocrates knew its narcotic and analgesic properties and used it against coughs. In 1805, a chemist named Sir Turner isolated the active compound from the plant for the first time. He named it morphine after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Morphine is currently included on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. It is one of the primary treatments for severe cancer pain, heart attack pain, and post-operative pain. Even today, with all of modern chemistry available, morphine is still mainly obtained directly from the plant using techniques that have remained largely unchanged across 8 millennia, 8,000 years. The same plant, the same purpose, the same result. And then there is the most remarkable story of all. In the 1960s and 70s, malaria was killing between 1.5 and 2.7 million people every year. The disease had become resistant to existing drugs. The world needed a new treatment, and it needed one urgently. A Chinese scientist named Tu Youyou was assigned to lead a research project called Project 523. Its mission was to search Chinese herbal medicine for a cure for malaria. Her team studied more than 2,000 traditional Chinese herbal preparations. They identified 640 candidates with possible antimalarial activity. They tested more than 240,000 compounds, and then they found it. An extract from a plant called Artemisia annua. In China, it had been known for centuries as Qinghao. The first evidence of its use appears in a burial tomb from the Han Dynasty dating back 2,000 years, where it was described as a treatment for fevers, some of which were almost certainly malarial. A 4th century text called the Emergency Prescription Manual described exactly how to prepare the plant's medicines, specifying that it should be processed cold, not heated. This detail had been in the ancient texts for 700 years. Tu Youyou's team found this instruction, followed it, and changed everything. On October 4th, 1971, they obtained an extract that was 100% effective against malaria parasites in infected mice. Since the year 2000, antimalarial treatments containing artemisinin have saved more than 3 million lives. Tu Youyou received the Nobel Prize for this work in 2015. The cure for one of humanity's most deadly diseases was sitting in a 1,700-year-old text. It was sitting there the entire time. Waiting, this is where the story reaches its most extraordinary point. In the 1940s, a Canadian scientist named Robert Noble was studying a small ornamental plant called the Madagascar periwinkle. It had been used in traditional medicine in India, the Philippines, and South Africa for centuries, primarily as an anti-diabetic and antimalarial treatment. Noble was not looking for cancer drugs. He was looking for oral treatments for diabetes, but something strange kept happening in his laboratory. Mice given the periwinkle extract were dying of infections. Their white blood cell counts were collapsing. He and his colleagues made a connection. If the plant could reduce white blood cells this dramatically, it might also be effective against leukemia, a cancer that involves the uncontrolled growth of cancerous white blood cells. They were right. From the periwinkle, scientists isolated two compounds, vincristine and vinblastine. Today, 60% of currently used anti-cancer agents come from natural sources including plants. Vincristine is one of the primary drugs used to treat acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children. Vinblastine is used to treat Hodgkin's lymphoma, breast cancer, and testicular carcinoma. Nearly 70 years after their discovery, both drugs remain among the most effective long-lasting anti-cancer agents in clinical use. Traditional healers in India and the Philippines were using the plant that produced them for centuries before any scientist understood why. And there is one more detail that closes something the story opened at the beginning. The diabetes drug metformin, currently the most prescribed anti-diabetic drug in the world with billions of dollars spent on it annually, was derived from a plant called Galega officinalis. Medieval herbalists were using this exact plant to treat excessive urination, which is one of the primary symptoms of diabetes, centuries before anyone knew what diabetes was or what caused it. They did not know about blood glucose. They did not know about insulin. They just knew that this plant helped, and they were right. Here is what all of this adds up to. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were sick, they were injured, they were dying, and they had nothing but the world around them and the intelligence to pay attention to it. They watched. They tried. They failed and they died and they tried again. They passed what worked to the next generation. And the next. And the next. They encoded their knowledge into texts that were used for 1,000 years, into traditions that crossed continents, into preparations that reached the same conclusions independently in China and Egypt and India and South America without any contact between them. The cancer drug that is treating a child with leukemia right now traces back to a flower that traditional healers in India were using for centuries. The painkiller that is managing pain in a hospital right now was first documented 3,500 years ago in a papyrus found in Egypt. The antimalarial drug that has saved over 3 million lives since the year 2000 was described in a Chinese text written 700 years ago. The diabetes drug prescribed to hundreds of millions of people today came from a medieval herb used because it helped with symptoms nobody at the time understood. None of these were accidents. They were the result of the longest, largest, most expensive clinical trial in human history, paid for in human lives, conducted across every continent, running for tens of thousands of years. Ancient humans survived without modern medicine because they built something that eventually became modern medicine. The pharmacy did not replace the forest. The pharmacy came from it. Here is something worth carrying with you. The WHO currently estimates that more than 20,000 medicinal plants exist worldwide. Only a small fraction of them have been studied for their therapeutic properties. That means there are almost certainly plants sitting in rainforests and mountain valleys and ancient wilderness right now that contain compounds we have not found yet. Potential cures for diseases we are still losing to. Knowledge that may already exist, buried in texts we have not fully translated, in traditions we have not fully listened to. The story of ancient medicine is not finished. An orangutan in Sumatra applied a healing plant to its own wound in 2024. A researcher noticed. A paper was published. The world learned something new about where healing knowledge comes from. The oldest experiment in history is still running. And somewhere out there, in a plant nobody has studied yet, the next chapter is already waiting to be found.